Over the weekend, a man held a rabbi and several others hostage at a synagogue in the Dallas-Fort Worth, Texas area. The situation unfolded during Shabbat morning services at Congregation Beth Israel following the 12-hour standoff with an armed suspect. Governor Greg Abbott says all 4 hostages are alive and safe, thank goodness. During the incident, the synagogue had been live streaming its services on Facebook, and the suspect's actions had been partially recorded on the stream. Our next guest, Batya Ungar-Sargon, tweeted that CNN had members of the targeted synagogue reporting that the man holding members hostage flew 5,000 miles to find the synagogue closest to the Fort Worth prison, and that there was a lot of anti-Israel invective in his commentary.
The suspect had claimed his sister was Afia Siddiqui, a relative of Khalid Sheikh Mohammed, a chief architect of 9/11. However, a lawyer that represented Siddiqui's biological brother said he was not the person inside the synagogue. And according to Fox, Afia Siddiqui herself denounced the hostage-taking. The suspect, 44-year-old Malik Faisal Akram, was declared dead by police at the scene. The FBI also originally maintained that the hostage-takers' demands were specifically focused on an issue not connected to the Jewish community, but has since seemed to double back on that assertion with a new statement reading, quote, "This is a terrorism-related matter in which the Jewish community was targeted and is being investigated by the Joint Terrorism Task Force." Deputy editor at Newsweek, author, and friend of the show, Batya Ungar-Sargon, joins us now to discuss the event. Batya, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much for having me, guys.
So can you unpack this for us? What do we know so far about the motivations of the hostage taker?
So we know that he apparently is a British national, although the ADL initially told me he was also possibly Pakistani. He flew to Texas, and then after taking the rabbi of a Texas synagogue hostage and 3 other members of the community, he had that Texas rabbi call another rabbi in New York City, the rabbi of a synagogue called Central Synagogue, and asked her to, quote, use her influence in order to get Afia Siddiqui released from prison. So that's why you're seeing a lot of Jews sort of feeling, undermined and a little bit horrified by the FBI saying that this was not connected to the Jewish community, and then having the media sort of carry that narrative over and say this wasn't an anti-Semitic attack, because he literally used sort of the most anti-Semitic logic in the book to justify his actions, right? He went and found one group of Jews who he assumed had connections to another Jew who he assumed had the power to release a prisoner who herself is deeply anti-Semitic, and demanded that the jurors on her trial take DNA tests to prove that they were not Jewish, because anyone Jewish or Zionist was suspect. So, a lot of Jews feel that this is part of a pattern where anti-Semitic attacks are not given the gravity that they deserve. Now, I just want to make one more point, which is that, anti-Semitism is rising on all sides of the political spectrum from many different places. But at the same time, I think it's really important that we emphasize that we are still the luckiest Jews to ever walk planet Earth. Like, I think it's really important that we not be hysterical about the rise in anti-Semitism. It is important to talk about it. It is really important to discuss and to prevent in the ways that we can. But at the same time, I'm sort of not convinced that, every synagogue now should feel under attack.
Yeah, I think that's a great point. I similarly feel like, we should take something like this very seriously, because this was a serious, terrifying thing to happen to those people. Thank goodness they're all safe. And also that it is clearly has something to do with the Jewish community, and they were specifically targeted, and it was on an issue. I don't know why the FBI said that. A clearly, political issue relating to the Jewish community. Now, you can do all that without, going totally over dramatic, hyperbolizing, that all Jewish people should feel unsafe, and this is like an extremely serious act of terrorism or whatever. We don't want to justify new surveillance or new bad policies, that kind of stuff. Exactly. Anyway. So that, but just saying like, oh yeah, it's you could do that in every time, because the kinds of people who commit these acts and like all sorts of acts of violence are kind of on some level crazy because it's a crazy thing to do. The media loves to like find out what their agenda is, and it's kind of a political agenda. It's kind of just a crazy person. There's a lot of things where it's more political or sometimes where it's more just crazy, but it's all kind of crazy. So we go looking for like an explanation when it's like, well, crazy people are doing crazy things, but certainly more than tangentially related to Jewish people and so forth.
Yeah, and I think that the thing that really stood out to me and a lot of other Jews is that what you really saw was the media, basically carrying water for this guy, almost like trying to say he's not an anti-Semite. There was that great headline from the Telegraph, British man with a British accent takes Jews hostages. And it was almost like the media together took a story about a Muslim guy taking Jews hostage for political reasons and turned it into a story about a British guy taking Americans hostage for, who knows why, right? That sort of taking the context away. And it really
it wasn't Hugh Grant who did it.
Right, exactly. And, in 2019 and 2020, there were about 100 attacks on Orthodox Jews in the New York area, physical attacks, Jews being beaten up. And 2/3 of the attacks were by young Black men. And, they were not motivated by any particular ideology. It was a form of bullying of Hasidic Jews who sometimes, to them probably look really funny. But there was this sort of a taboo on discussing it from leftist media because the attackers were from, quote unquote, marginalized group. And in that sort of the woke ideology that I argue in my book has really taken a stranglehold of the media. If the attacker or the perpetrators from the wrong group, their crime will often get either not discussed at all or memory hold.
Well, and it's the same thing with attacks on Asian people. The media has tried to connect it to this narrative of that it's right-wing rage and violence unleashed by President Trump and by his rhetoric and the things he said about China. And then you look at the attacks and then you look at who's perpetrating them and you're like, this is unlikely to be Trump voters here. But President Biden weighed in on the synagogue matter as events were unfolding. Let's watch that.
I also told him that I wanted to make sure we got the word out to synagogues and places of worship that we're not going to tolerate this, that we have this capacity to deal with assaults on particularly the anti-Semitism that has grown up. And so, and I'll be talking with, I put a call into the rabbi. We missed one another on the way up here. But they should rest assured that we are focused. We are focused. The Attorney General is focused on making sure that we deal with these kinds of acts.
And Batya, in my memory, this was kind of a unique and strange type of terrorist attack in the sense that it drew on the type of anti-Semitism that Trump toys with. It's anti-Semitism that expresses itself as like pro-Semitism. Like, you remember that comment that Trump made where he's lamenting that it used to be that the Jews controlled Congress, but the Jews don't control Congress anymore because now Ilhan Omar and the squad is in there. And so he's kind of narrating all of the old tropes, but he's saying them as good things, like about how wonderful it is that Israel controlled Congress. And so here you have this guy who's like, wow, the Jews run America. They control everything. And so all I need to do is then force one of them to puppeteer the world on my behalf, which is just such a weird and broken mind and way of thinking. I don't remember a hostage situation or a terror, any terror situation that kind of played out in this. Have you ever seen this before, where a guy says, "I've been told that Jews run the world, so therefore I'm going to take some hostages and have them run the world for me"?
I can't say I've ever seen anything like this. I agree with you. I think this was a very unique, bizarre situation. And I also agree with Robbie. I hope we're not going to see now a crackdown, civil rights being taken away from people in order to prevent something that seems to me pretty much unpreventable. At the same time, the view that Jews control the media and Jews control the world is unfortunately very, very prevalent in many countries across the Middle East, in many communities, even in New York. And, like I said, across the political spectrum. You're increasingly seeing this horseshoe effect where you see, right-wing people now turning anti-Zionist, David Duke finding common cause with people on the far left who really hate Israel. And I'm not a person who thinks that all anti-Zionism is inherently anti-Semitic, but the view of Jews as uniquely malevolent who undermine every country that, they live in, undermine every cause that they're associated with, undermine everybody around them with their power. Sadly, that's quite prevalent. Now, now. At the same time, like I said earlier, until a view like that breaks out into actual violence, I believe it's everybody's right to hold terrible, horrible views, right? Like that's sort of the name of the game in a democracy. People are allowed to believe stupid, terrible, awful things. But at the same time, when it does break out into reality like this, what you want to see is a full-throated condemnation from people across the board. And I do have to say, I thought it was really amazing that CARE really came out full-throatedly against this and said, no act of violence is at all acceptable, even though they themselves have been involved in advocating on behalf of Afia Siddiqui.
Right, and no acts of violence are permissible, regardless of the reason, the ideology.
Yes.
It doesn't matter if it's political. It doesn't matter if it's just crazy. It doesn't matter if it's personal. It doesn't matter. It's not okay. The government is and should be empowered to prevent it, because violence is the thing the government is supposed to stop. Batya, thank you so much for being with us.
Thank you guys for covering this and for having me.
Our pleasure. More Rising after this. Stay with us.